I'd like to talk about some findings I recently read about in a recent HRB article. And these findings were based on analysis of but close to 5,000 C-level job descriptions. And what these findings underscored is that in order to land a CEO position today, it takes much more than industry expertise and financial savvy. What companies are really seeking from leaders are those with really strong social skills. And that translates to one's ability to effectively listen and communicate, to build relationships and come from a people-oriented problem-solving perspective. Thank you so much, Andrew. You can take the slide down now. So that being the case, in your experience, what are the workforce, generational and societal factors that are causing this change and this heightened demand for leaders to have these strong social skills?
I'll jump in and just sort of say, I think one is the tools that are at our disposal make the role of the leader sort of increasingly important in terms of transparency. You know, before the communications people, whether it was Andrew, me, or all those on the call today, were in charge of the channels and the messages and timing and a lot of the other sort of the getting the word out aspects of things. And that isn't necessarily true today. I mean, now everyone can be a communicator. Everyone has these little toys. Everybody is sending messages. There's backstream messages, electronic notes being passed in class, if you will, sort of a backstory to what's going on. So there's almost this electric buzz that takes place, whether someone is communicating or not. So there's an increased demand for hearing from my boss, my boss's boss, my boss, everybody in the organization. And then there's sort of this, is what we're hearing authentic? Is it real? During the last couple of years with COVID, we've sort of had, had an invitation into a lot of people's living rooms. And there was, I would say there's almost like a leveling of that organizational pyramid. At a certain way, we all became victims of something much bigger than any of us individually. And we all shared a human experience. And I think the expectation now is that person, that leader that I got to see her living room or his den, I'm a little bit more on their plane than I may have been in the past. So I think there's an expectation there that we're closer as peers. I want you to be honest and open with me.
Andrew?
Yeah, I would agree with most of that. And I think it's the tools and the social media and all of the things that we now use just as consumers, as voters, as people living in contemporary society that allow us to communicate much more frequently with much more ease and see much more of each other's lives. And then there's also sort of the political world trends that we're in, right? Which is where people feel like they actually have more of a voice than they used to. And it plays itself out in all sorts of interesting and complicated ways. We're seeing it playing out. There's an election obviously here in the United States soon, and the election issues happening in the UK and the like, and a lot of people feeling like they have the expectation of a voice in that new election this week, and they didn't have one because of the way their process works. So people have an expectation that not only do they have a voice, but that they want to be heard. And that obviously translates for leaders into like, oh, it isn't just what I say and then everybody gets on board. It's like you're immediately and always in a conversation of sorts with people. And so even employees are feeling much more empowered to raise their voices and speak up, in large part, I think, because of the tools that we have and because of sort of the social sort of world that we're just living in right now. And so that just presents a bunch of unique challenges, as Carrie mentioned, about for what a leader is supposed to do. How are you supposed to speak? And so therefore, people can tell when you're being fake, you're being like Mr. or Miss CEO person, right? They want you to just be human. They want you to be more relatable. And that's really hard for a lot of leaders to do because it requires a level of vulnerability that many of us are just not trained in or used to doing. So that's how I spend a lot of time helping people try to be more open and be a little more vulnerable. And we can talk more about that if you're interested.
And I think you bring up a great point, Andrew. It's that for historic purposes, internal communications and exec comms is viewed as a one-way street. I mean, really, it was sort of that top-down, push the messages out to all those who need to hear, want to hear, are willing to sit and listen. And we didn't probably put as much emphasis on that whole power listening as we did on the power speaking part of things, and the whole adage of 2 ears and 1 mouth and use them in those proportions. There was the expectation that I would listen to whatever it is that the CEO had to say, no matter when and where it was delivered, because that was in some ways sort of the driving force, the gospel, and to coach CEOs and leaders everywhere how to be just as effective at listening to the messages coming up and across the organization as in putting messages out is a new expectation of all of them.
That's right. That's right. And I think one of you touched on this too. I think another big factor is the younger generations just have different expectations than a baby boomer of my time has. It isn't so much the hierarchical organizational structure anymore. It's much flatter organizations. And the younger generations are expecting that access and that recognition and a direct line of sight to the most senior leaders of the organization.